The Solar Energy Technologies Office, or SETO, as we often refer to ourselves, supports innovation across the solar energy spectrum to reach lower costs of electricity and to support the transition to a decarbonized economy. We usually release several funding opportunities each year, and these funding opportunities come with topic areas that are designed to address critical spaces where we really want to accelerate innovation. SETO has a long history of supporting innovation in solar energy technologies, and these innovations, coupled with other advancements in the industry, have enabled solar costs to drop dramatically over the past decade 70 to 80%. This is making solar electricity one of the cheapest forms, and in many areas, the country, the cheapest for new electricity generation today. It's critical that we continue to innovate and drive costs down further. Doing so will enable our electricity supply to be more affordable, and it will also accelerate solar deployment. Dubai administration has set a goal of 100% clean electricity supply by 2035. Solar is going to have a huge role to play in getting to that goal. Solar could provide as much as 40% of electricity in a clean grid, that's 10 times more than it's providing today. With the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, we see the industry poised for dramatic growth both in deployment, as well as in manufacturing, supporting good-paying jobs and rapid growth toward our goal of having a clean electricity grid. Greenhouse gases act as a layer of insulation, trapping some of the sun's warmth before it is released back into space. This process is known as the greenhouse gas effect. The primary greenhouse gases from energy production and consumption are methane and carbon dioxide. The rate at which we have added greenhouse gases to the atmosphere since industrialization is the leading cause of climate change. Climate change is causing extreme weather events, like droughts, floods, fires, and hurricanes. These events will increase in frequency if we do not reduce emissions in the atmosphere. For much of human history, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have been kept at safe levels by natural carbon sinks, such as oceans, forests, and wetlands. However, we are now adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere faster than natural carbon sinks can absorb them. When people talk about climate change, they often reference the average increase in temperature around the world. For instance, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has recommended a cap of 1.5 degrees Celsius as the maximum amount of average warming that can happen while maintaining a safe environment for people. Your accent really reveals a lot about who you are and your identity. It will tell people what your native language is, be able to tell you probably where you come from. Mark Pell, a communications professor at McGill University in Montreal. And according to Pell, one reaction to a different accent can be a bias against that person. Previous research that has been done elsewhere showed that people who have an accent tend to be trusted less, simply because they have an accent. But the idea that we would have a bias against anyone who sort of doesn't sound like us, I think probably relates to some sort of evolutionary or long-standing suspicion we have of outsiders or strangers. So this might be sort of an ingrained response that we have to the accent, but accents aren't the only thing we listen for when we have to decide if we trust another person. Tone of voice also plays a role. Pell and his team wanted to know if people would trust a confident tone, even if it came from someone with an accent. Adidas teamed up with an organization called Parley for the Oceans. Parley goes out and collects plastic waste from the ocean. Adidas uses the plastic waste to make shoes. Shoes made with plastic from the ocean, good for the environment and good for business. Because if you know that rapidly growing consumer segment known as hipsters, and I know you know hipsters, then you know that a hipster faced with choice between a no-name shoe and an Adidas made with plastic from the ocean will pick the Adidas every day of the week and twice on Sunday, and then walk around like it's no big deal but look for every opportunity to talk about them. So 2 decades later, what's changed? It's now widely recognized that just 20% of health outcomes are tied to medical care, whereas up to 70% are tied to healthy behaviors and what's called the social determinants of health, basically, everything that happens to us for that vast majority of time when we're not in the doctor's office or the hospital. Healthcare executives now routinely remind us that our zip code matters more than our genetic code. And one healthcare publication even recently had the audacity to describe the social determinants of health as the feel-good buzzword of the year. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My theme for this session is convergence, technology change, and business practice. This is somewhat dear to my heart, in that I have spent much of the last 15 years involved in various spectrum, from aspects of technology and their impact on business, across a broad spectrum from applications of signal processing and manufacture right through to the use of utilization data and diary applications, to improve the time utilization of the sales force. One of the great contributing factors to mental illness is the idea that we should at all costs, and at all times be well. We suffer far more than we should because of how long it can take many of us until we allow ourselves to fall properly and usefully ill. In a crisis, our chances of getting better rely to a significant extent on having the right relationship to our illness, an attitude which is relatively unfrightened by our distress, which isn't overly in love with the idea of seeming at all times normal, which can allow us to be deranged for a while in order one day to reach a more authentic kind of sanity. It will help us immensely in this quest if the images of mental illness we can draw on at this time do not narrowly imply that our ailment is merely a freakish and pitiable possibility, if we can appeal to images that tease out the universal and dignified themes of our state, so that we do not, on top of everything else, have to fear and hate ourselves for being unwell. If you have a dog, you may have noticed that sometimes it seems to be smiling. But, of course, we know that dogs don't really smile. That's just how dog mouths appear sometimes, right? Perhaps, but according to neuroscientist Ink Panksepp of Bowling Green State University, some animals do laugh. When chimps play, Panksepp notes, they make panting sounds that could be a form of laughter. Even rats have a way of laughing, by chirping when they're playing with each other or being tickled by humans. But, if animals do in fact laugh, what are they laughing at? Scientists have long known that for many animals, life isn't all about hunting, foraging, fighting, and sleeping. Young animals also play a lot, which suggests that animal laughter is related to playful joy. So for me, the act of bullet journaling is an act of thinking, it's an act of unplugging and actually processing the information, and in my community I've found that that's also provided significant value to people who get caught up in the rush of everyday life. It's a moment that you can take back. It's a moment where you can really have the luxury of sitting down and starting to digest the things that you otherwise can easily be overwhelmed by. I think one thing that we often kind of forget is just because something is convenient does not make it efficient. So a lot of times data entry, if you type for example, happens a lot faster, but in that process, a lot gets lost because you're just kind of parroting the source, and I think that it's really important to actually hear what's being said than just simply kind of spitting it back out onto paper. So when you're writing, a lot of the time what you want to do is reduce the amount of information that you're capturing only down to The White House was the largest house in the country until after the Civil War in the 1860s. The White House has 132 rooms, including 16 family and guest rooms, 35 bathrooms, and 3 kitchens. There are 6 levels. The first level has many famous rooms. For example, the West Wing of the White House includes the Oval Office. This is where the president works and meets with his advisors. The president receives guests in the Blue Room. And the State Dining Room can hold 140 people for official and honor of foreign leaders. The second and third floors are the family's private areas. When it is cold outside, the president and his family can warm up near one of the White House's 28 fireplaces. And when it is hot outside, they can swim in the outdoor pool. Today we look up into the skies to explore the past and present of the tallest buildings in the world. Skyscrapers were first built in the late 19th century. Engineers then probably would not believe the soaring heights of today's tallest buildings. Skyscrapers represent modernity, power, and the expanding boundaries of human invention and new technology. Skyscrapers were invented in the United States. As early as the 1880s, two new technical developments made these taller buildings possible. One development was the mechanical elevator. It meant that people would not have to climb many steps to reach the upper floors of tall buildings. The development of steel building technology also helped make taller buildings possible. What can you do with earthworms? Some people use the creepy crawlers to catch fish. But others put worms to work making compost. Compost looks and feels like good soil. Gardeners and farmers add it to soil to make plants grow better. You can make compost from food waste at home with or without the help of worms. How the worms help is by first eating and processing the food. It comes out the other end of the worm as rich compost. Kim Gable from the University of Florida Extension Service in Key West suggests using red worms known as red wigglers.